My only concern about getting started earlier rather than later is that the roadmap is very long. And there's a lot to cover. I tend to ramble, and so this way it gives me more time to ramble. So this is just an incidental presentation. I'm sure none of you came here with any interest at all as to what the next version of ArcaOS is going to be. It's nice for once to be at a Warpstock where instead of us talking about is there going to be another version of the operating system and what are we going to talk about next year, we're talking about what the next version is going to be and what we will likely be talking about next year. So this is just a very early preview of 5.1. 5.1 development has not really begun in earnest yet. We're still in the planning stages. So along the way to 5.1, we released 5.0.1, which had some important fixes in the install routine itself. You'll find that now that we are getting our update channel running, you should not have to download an entire new installation disk in order to update your system. But if there is an update that affects installation of new systems, we will spin a new release and it will be a point release. So 5.0.1, 5.0.2 is in process right now. It will include the updated SMP kernel.
That's from IBM?
No, that's the updated SMP kernel is from us.
You updated the kernel?
Yes, yes. Updated drivers and some updated tools. DVD Tools has gotten an update recently that we're testing. Archive Tool has gotten an update recently that we're testing. Samba has been updated to 4.4.13. Samba 4.4 is in maintenance mode right now, so this is probably going to be the last 4.4 release. I will talk a little bit more about Samba when we get into what's planned for 5.1.
USB sick.
USB sick.
USB stick boot installation. Yes.
Yes.
So if your USB stick is not doing well,
But it's on the mend.
What's the fact 32? Should we infect our sticks?
we have in testing right now a bootable USB stick. OS2 booting from a USB stick. It's completely portable. And what it essentially does is it boots the installation environment and mounts the ISO image as though it were a CD after it boots off the stick, which is really pretty nifty. But the biggest feature that brings with it is the ability to install on systems that don't have a DVD. Systems where there is a DVD, but we have issues where somehow or other we lose contact with the DVD, and then you get the dreaded please insert installation media message when your installation media has already been inserted. You can also, instead of installing from a USB stick, find a 2 gigabyte or less empty space on your local hard drive and create a bootable partition there. It's just a FAT16 partition. It's very simple to do. And boot from that to install the operating system.
Wow.
And the script is very easy to run. The script is literally the command, the drive letter where you're creating your bootable installation, and your bootable installer, whether it's the drive letter for the USB stick or for that extra partition, and the location of your ArcaOS ISO. That's it. 3 parameters, and then you just let it run, and you will get a, hopefully, bootable installation thing or partition. And that's the second point of the partition boot. It's the same technology, the same script. 5.0.3 is likely just because of how far out we figure 5.1 is going to be. Do not expect 5.1 before the 4th quarter of next year. And when I say the 4th quarter of next year, I do not know whether that's October or December. But I would imagine that before the end of 2018, we will have 5.1. There's a lot to go into 5.1, so a lot of work to be done.
When did you say this would be the 5.0.3?
He didn't.
I didn't. It's likely that we'll have a 5.0.3 just because of how far out 5.1 is going to be. And if we do have a 5.0.3, it'll have updates to the installer. We'll find some things that we want to fix. And we may do MP3 playback. The patents on MP3 have expired, and most Linux distributions are now getting ready to include MP3 support by default. So we may do that. It all depends. We're taking a wait and see approach because there have been third parties who have expressed some ownership over MP3, related MP3 patents, and so we're not sure whether there's going to be any rumbling or grumbling in the courts about that. If we were a free operating system, we would have a lot less concern about bundling MP3 support. But because we're a commercial enterprise, we don't want to get hauled into court for something stupid like including a 20-year-old MP3 player. Additional 5.0 updates are possible. So maybe 5.0.3 won't be the last 5.0 release that we'll see. The point is that other than installer fixes, you should not have to download an entire ISO at this point. If you've got an installed ArcaOS 5.0 or 5.0.1 system, you should be able to just use your normal update channel to get the updated content and apply that to your installed system. Our goal is not to have everyone reinstall the operating system every time we have an update. But by the same token, our goal is that the latest content be in the installation media. So if you're installing fresh, you don't need to then install and then apply 50 updates on top of it in order to get a working system. Okay, so here's what's coming in 5.1 plan. So right now we have an English-only ArcaOS. So we should have some national language versions. Single byte character set. I don't believe we're going to have double byte character set in 5.1, but it depends. If a large Taiwanese customer comes to us or a large Japanese customer comes to us and said we want to buy 1,000 licenses, we will definitely step that up the list of priorities.
North Korea wants it.
North Korea wants it.
Depends on the number of licenses.
Yeah. we may have some additional demands on that deal. So what we're planning to do for NLV, which is different from IBM's approach, is that we are planning to include a number of languages on an NLV disk so that you can download one DVD image for, say, German, Dutch, French, Italian, and Spanish. We can probably cram 5 languages on there, and that will probably include English also. But the English-only DVD will not be going away. So if you're in the United States, if you have no need for a non-English language, you will not have to download a 4.5 gigabyte ISO. You'll still be able to download the English-only ISO. But if you're in Europe, then you'll download a larger ISO image that'll have all those languages on it. We also plan to provide some way so that you can upgrade or migrate your system. So the difference between upgrade and migration is this. An upgrade is if you already have ArcaOS 5.0, you upgrade to ArcaOS 5.1. If you have Ecom Station 2.1, you have to migrate that. Our directory structure is different from ECS, and there's a bunch of stuff that's different. So this, of course, takes a tremendous amount of time. The upgrade, not so much, oddly enough, but the migration, transferring stuff from a different disk layout to what we need, that's going to take some time, but we plan to do that in 5.1. Installer updates. So you should be able to select your boot language. The idea is that if you don't speak a lick of English and you only speak German, you should be able to put in the disk, be greeted with a selection of languages, including the one that you can read, select that language, and then boot into that language the whole way through the install process. So if you go to the pre-boot menu and you have to make selections, it should be in German if you select German as your language. When you get to the installer, it shouldn't greet you in English and make you have to select German. It should greet you in German when it brings up the installer and take you all the way through. I am just absolutely amazed at how much stuff has to be translated to make that happen. And it's not just the pre-boot, it's not just the installer, it's not just the OS2 Warp 452 components. It's all the third-party applications that we ship along with the operating system that need to be translated. It's a huge project.
Give me a call, I'll send you a list. I still remember it off the top of my head, so.
Every time I think about it, I think, oh yeah, there's something else that's going to need a translation.
Now, do you have people that won't buy it because of this? I'm just curious what the...
We have some people who have been holding off in Europe, Germany in particular. We don't have a lot of call for a Dutch version yet. But German and French and Italian, I know, have been requested.
So it's worth the money you might get to
Spanish
speak with
makes
this.
sense for you guys.
Yeah, it's definitely worth the investment for us.
Okay.
It's definitely worth the investment.
Spanish.
Now, here's the interesting thing. Warp 4 itself shipped in more languages than Merlin Convenience Pack 2. They removed a bunch of languages. We licensed Merlin Convenience Pack 2. We didn't license OS2 Warp 4, which is why we don't bundle, for instance, voice type, because voice type had already been ripped out. So, for languages that were not part of MCP2, we may have some issues. If someone comes to us and says, well, I don't know which languages in particular. Was Hebrew ripped out of Warp 452? If someone comes to us and says, I want one of those languages, we'll have to figure out how we're going to do that, how we're going to deliver it. So in other words, I can't take IBM's language files from OS2 Warp and ship them with ArcaOS 5.1.
It would work, but you're not legally allowed.
Exactly. It would work just fine, but we're not legally entitled to do it.
No, it won't.
It won't?
Because to make things even more complicated, there are changes between Warp 4 and the MCP stuff. I know because the Russians converted at the time all of the resources from a Warp 4 Russian fixed spec 9. Mm-hmm. They created an ECS 1.2R Russian, and they actually sat down and went through all the DLLs. But the trouble is that there were differences between MCP and Warp 4, from what I remember, in how the resource DLLs are laid out. So it's
not just the message
it's
files.
a legal thing. It's also with Alex Taylor at the time, I also tried to look at creating a Korean version of ECS, but exactly the same problem applies, and it's even worse because DBCS has separate components in it. What does the DBCS version have? Does it have a special keyboard driver and a
It's got special keyboard drivers, it's got special font drivers, it's got special video drivers, and it's got a special front-end processor for converting keyboard input into the particular
Well, the
language in
video
question.
driver is that's already around. That's not language specific, but the
No. DBCS requires some special. I don't know if you call it a video driver exactly. The source is in the DDK if anybody technical wants to see how it works. But you need special video driver hooks to actually display the fonts in VO sections, for example. And we could never even get that working for Korea.
yeah, we worked on
Dumb-
a green version.
Dumb,
so-
unrelated question.
Okay.
Is there ever a Indonesian, Malaysian version? I mean, it'll work with even 437 as a
No,
that's a
no.
standard.
Not,
okay.
not of which I'm
No.
aware.
Okay, because that's got, I don't know, 350 million speakers or something like that.
Well, and then you get into, I mean, there are interesting language differences. For instance, there's Portuguese, and then there's Brazilian Portuguese. Of course, there's American English and UK English. Those are two different languages.
Canadian.
Yeah.
Canadian.
But
Yeah, exactly. They
that's-
speak something.
Other than, but that's not too bad. That's once you learn the 40 common things that are going to get you,
Yeah.
you're okay. Yeah.
What about
Washroom,
Russian? I
parquet,
noticed Russian's not
a
in
few
this.
other.
Seems like there's a lot of people there.
If we had demand for a Russian version, then we would step up the Russian. But
Trump,
so far it's really the Western European languages that have come up.
How many paying Russians would there be?
So a fix that you may see sooner than that is better time zone selection. The time zone selection in the installer now was a compromise in order to get it done, but it wasn't our first choice for how we wanted to do that. There will likely be a fix in 502 for the country and locale selection, because right now you can select an incompatible country and code page, and then you end up with quite a bit of a mess. Horizontal scroll bars for lists. So depending on what your screen resolution is, if you're on a 4x3 screen and you're going down the list of hardware, you can very easily hit 2 or 3 objects in the list that look like they're exactly the same because you can't see what's over there. So we're adding horizontal scroll bars to those lists. That's another one of those things that sounds, very simple. It's just a horizontal scroll bar. But you've got selection controls on the left side. So do you scroll the entire line across? Do you move the entire list across? Do you only move the text across? And now, when you move the text across, you can't see the left portion of the text. So there's a whole bunch of decisions that need to be made as to how best to implement that particular functionality. But that's going to happen. It's going to make it a lot easier to select things from the hardware list, the software list, so on and so forth. Improve removable support in System Manager. Right now when you go into System Management and you stick in the USB stick, you've got to refresh removable media, which again was a hasty compromise just because we needed some way to be able to read the stick if you jammed it in after you booted the machine. And otherwise you wouldn't be able to get the content off the stick. So we added a refresh removable media. But really what we want is a standalone insert eject widget, which we actually do have. We just haven't implemented it yet. We're going to have a graphical multimedia installer, which we currently lack. Make it easier to install multimedia features. What kind of multimedia features might one install? Well, one might install a second audio driver, such as Lars's USB audio driver. We don't have a graphical multimedia installer now. That work is in process. a video driver switcher. So let's say you install a system and you took the default and installed Panorama and you realize, you know, I have this really, really nifty, though slightly antique, ATI X600 video card with 256 megs of video RAM on it, and it's not accelerated. I would really like to use Snap. Well, it's not very easy to switch right now from Panorama to Snap, or vice versa. So we want to provide a video driver switcher to make that easier to accomplish. And remember, it's not just changing the driver. Changing the driver is the easy part. That's a matter of copying some files and editing config sys. But registering the screen pages properly in the workplace shell so that you can then configure the driver that you've just installed, that's a whole other layer of complexity. So that stuff really takes more time than just the installation of the code itself. New selective install. So what we have right now is we have IBM selective install with a bunch of things masked out of it that are no longer relevant. We did the best we could with what we had at the time. It works, it gets the job done. We worked around the problem of clicking the SMP box on a machine that had an SMP kernel, because what would happen is it would test for SMP and would, what was happening? It would test for SMP and freeze.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't finding what it, because we weren't using OS2 APIC.
Yeah.
So the whole system would freeze. So now what we did was, the box is still there because getting rid of the box was problematic, but it doesn't do anything now. We have it looking for something else that it'll always find, will always be happy. But it will dump some extra files on your disk if you check the box. That's going to go away. So, but again, it sounds very simple. Oh, select an installer, okay. But it's nightmarish to implement. But it's something that we would like to have in 5.1. So
If it's just for drivers, it wouldn't be that hard. If we want to be able to modify installed operating system components, that gets more difficult.
So one of the suggestions that I came up with was, why do we have selective install at all? Well, Alex reminded me, if you want to change your country, your locale, it's the only way to do it. It's literally the only way to make that change right now. That's the way the operating system was designed.
Wouldn't it be easier if you just had a simple way to just sort of save your desktop and other stuff and just reinstall with the change?
Well, yeah, but then you have to go through a whole reinstall of the operating system and then restore your desktop.
Wouldn't it might be?
Well, there's
user
something to be
point of
said for
view,
the
I
alpha.
mean, you just
If,
stick it in there and turn it on and
if
fix it.
you want to have a crash course OS2 migration, talk to me, because I, to a large extent together with Joachim, I designed the migration methodology in ECS. And I can tell you that doing a simple quote unquote desktop migration is far from easy.
Okay, that's
because
what I needed.
there are anywhere from 30 to 60 different INI files and different things that are stored in your MMOS2 directory, your IBM LAN directory, you name it. And
They're
all
all
of those
bits and
stuff,
pieces.
you expect that it
Yeah.
works. I'll just give one example and then quit. One of the ways that the IBM installer, if you take a classic MCP installation and you migrate an MCP1 installation to MCP2, and you have Lotus Smart Suite install, goodbye, because what the IBM installer does is that it simply nukes user dat and system dat, and then your Lotus Smart Suite objects are there on the desktop, but you can click on it, but they don't do anything. That's one of the examples of how the IBM installer it doesn't migrate, it just overwrites.
Yeah, yeah. So what you end up doing is you end up trading one set of problems for another set of problems.
Okay.
So we really do want to have a new selective installer that will actually allow you to swap in features that you didn't install from the installation disk at a later date, or pull them out if you need to pull them out. Updated bundled software, of course, so if we do have updates to DVD tools or archive tool. Those will be updated, all that stuff, obviously. More eye and ear candy. Additional backgrounds. We've got some new backgrounds that are coming. And our backgrounds, by the way, are open source licensed, so they'll be freely available for everyone, whether you're using ArcaOS or you're using Linux, or even if you're using that other, what's that fringe operating system from Redmond, Washington? But we'll have, here's the interesting thing, we were talking about this before. We have some great submitted wallpaper. The problem is that by the time you crop the wallpaper and resize it for the various different sizes, even in JPEG format, it very quickly becomes a very large package, which means that everyone has to download that very large package as part of the ISO, even if all he wants is one image for his desktop. So making these available for installation after the fact makes more sense to us than shipping all of that stuff. And believe me, we've got a bunch more images that have been submitted. So we're thinking about the best ways to make that stuff available. Wider device support. So David will be talking about drivers that are coming up. That stuff will be included, and it'll be available in the update channel. Oops. Now look at what I did. I blanked the screen. There we go. Improved documentation. There's still some documentation changes. I have a pet project that I haven't really unveiled that has been like ruminating in the back of my mind for a while, which is essentially a project to revamp all of the old OS2 documentation from IBM. If you look at any of the online help files that come with ArcaOS, come with Warp 4, because it's all the same, the language that's used to describe things is not really the way we would describe doing things now. We don't talk about computers the same way we did in 1990. So a lot of that stuff really should be rewritten. There's a lot of detail that can be taken out because people just know how to use a mouse now. Find your pointing device. Locate the button on the left. We really don't have to tell people that anymore. And if you've gotten this far, you can probably find the button on the left.
Where's the Warp 4 tutorial? Remember, with the little guy running onto the
Warp
PC
4 tutorial.
with the mouse button instruction, with left and right. I think there's this animation where it highlights this old PS2 classic mouse with these gray buttons on it, indicating what a left and right mouse.
And then it gives you a chance to practice.
Yes.
Yes.
So you can, but there's other documentation included that can be improved. The ArcaOS desktop documentation has been updated considerably, but there are still images and whatnot in that documentation which are not applicable to ArcaOS. They point back to an early version of ECS in some cases. Stuff like that just makes it easier to read and understand. So we want to include Samba 4.7, which is the current version of Samba. 4.6 is current stable. 4.7 is in development now. We're testing we're testing right now 4.6.7, so 4.7 is not far off. So we want to include the latest version of Samba when we ship 5.1. The latest version, let me be clear, the latest version which we can test and verify. Because building it and pushing it into the ISO a week later is not good practice. We need to build it, we need to test it for a couple of months at least, a number of us testing it heavily before we release it. The reason that we have 4.4.13 that will be coming out in ArcaOS 5.02 is that we uncovered an interesting bug where timestamps are not preserved on certain Samba connections. When you transfer the file, you get the date that the file was transferred, not the original date on the file. And that, in some cases, can be less than useful, to say the least. Heimdall Kerberos 7, right now we're using Heimdall Kerberos 1.5. They skipped 1.6 when they went to 1.7. They renumbered it to Heimdall 7. But that's the latest version, 7.4 something. So if you have Kerberos, a need for Kerberos authentication, the latest version of the authentication package will be included. Our new credentials manager, which is still in development, and
So I got sidetracked by a few minor projects.
a few minor things came up.
You're talking about the Samba client here, right?
Yes, I'm talking about the Samba client. Herwig was talking about the Samba server, and of course we would include that as well. So if Bitwise has the 4.7 Samba server done, then we would include that in our package. Absolutely. And that would be a goal for us to have matching Samba versions. There are some interesting complications that arise now with the Samba 3.6 server. Is that 3.6 is the current one, and the 4.4 client that we have, because the Samba guys in their infinite wisdoms changed some of the syntax in the Samba configuration file. And some of the syntax that was changed is in the global stanza, so it affects the server and the client. So it means that you need to have two different log level entries, one for the client and one for the server, because they don't read the same
Why would they
syntax. It's a left-hand, right-hand thing. I couldn't tell you. So the credentials manager, it will be a way of maintaining your Kerberos credentials and non-Kerberos credentials and managing Kerberos tickets. I've talked at previous Warpstocks about the way Kerberos works, where you request a ticket from the server, and when you get your ticket, then you can use that ticket to authenticate for other things, such as a Samba share. But you have to maintain your ticket. If you want to log out, that requires destroying your ticket. So you need a utility to manage the ticket. Right now you have to do that at the command line. Now, those of us who use Kerberos fairly regularly are comfortable with destroying tickets and requesting tickets at the command line. But the credentials manager will make that a heck of a lot easier. If you look at a Mac, Macintoshes include, no one calls it a Macintosh anymore. Macs include, in iOS, Kerberos ticket management. It's just part of the desktop in the authenticator. So we want to provide that, and so that's a goal for 5.1. Qt5, assuming Bitwise gets Qt5 built, we want to include Qt5. Java 1.8, again, assuming our Bitwise friends get somebody to do the Java work, we want to include an updated Java. Java 1.6 is getting a little long in the tooth at this point.
Wasn't there an older Java called 1.8?
1.18.
1.18.
1.18, yeah.
Yeah,
That was from IBM.
Uh-huh.
isn't the sort of the naming Java 6 and 7 and 8?
Mm-hmm.
Why is this being called 1.6?
No, because I wrote Java 1.8. OpenJDK has now changed. They're using OpenJDK 6, OpenJDK 7, OpenJDK 8.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I changed the Kerberos number, because I actually had Kerberos 1.7 up there because I think of it as 1.7. It's really the 1.7 version. Java is really the 1.8, will really be the 1.8 version, even though they call it Java 8. So yes, OpenJDK 8 is what I'm talking about.
That Firefox was first started doing this? Was it Firefox that first started doing this numbering change?
Firefox, I don't even want to get started on the rapid release cycle. Remember, the most important thing is not fixing the bugs, it's cranking out a new number.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, new and updated web browsers. As Hervey was talking about yesterday, we will hit a wall with Firefox 52. So we will have at least Firefox 52 in ArcaOS 5.1, and probably a Qt-based browser along with that. Look, web browser version numbers are just that, they're just numbers. Until a web browser is no longer secure and no longer useful on the net, it's difficult, for instance, to use Web Explorer today, right? It's difficult to use Netscape Communicator today. It's difficult to use the IBM web browser today. But can you use Firefox 2? It's not very secure, but you can render pages with it. It depends on what you want to do. Firefox 52 will be useful for at least 2 to 3 years after we get it built. So there's no sense in not including it if it's built and able to be used. And even after 2 to 3 years, if the websites haven't changed and it's still relatively secure, it still won't be a problem to use it. And if something complains, well, you're not using a newer version of Firefox, there's always things like User Agent Switcher, and you fake it and you make it look like Firefox 57 or Firefox 60 or Firefox 62. Who knows? But we also want to include an alternative web browser, at least one alternative web browser, so that people can start getting a taste of something else that may be a standard. And then we can get some feedback on that and hear from people, what do you like about it? So if we include Otter browser, for instance, which is a Qt5-based WebKit browser, we'd like to hear from people and say, you know, I tried Otter and this is what I don't like. I tried Otter and this is what I love. And then we can determine whether it's worthwhile to invest a lot of time and effort and expense in updating and maintaining Otter, or whether we should look at something else.
Is Chrome a WebKit browser?
Chrome is a WebKit browser.
But there's a lot of...
Chromium is not a WebKit browser? What
I thought it was.
does Chrome use?
Chrome uses itself, doesn't it?
I thought the engine was WebKit.
Chromium is WebKit.
Yes.
Just like Safari.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
It
it's
has a lot
WebKit.
of additional stuff that goes along that makes it difficult to...
Yeah, it's got a lot of additional stuff, and of course it's got that awful flat look and feel that does nothing for user experience.
Yeah, but it's a nice browser to have, really.
It's fast. Especially compared to how bloated Firefox has become. You know,
Has
back in
nice
the
development tools, it's a great browser.
You know, I'll tell you something. There are still some times when I fire up Peter Weilbacher, was that his name? Yeah, his Firefox 2 for something, like configuring a router. It is amazing how fast Firefox 2 fires up and just gets going and renders a page. It's amazing. And that's the way Firefox used to be. Chrome feels like that as compared to Firefox today. So, you know, I don't know that Chrome is all that in a bag of chips. I don't like it personally. I do run Chromium on Linux, not exclusively. I'm a CMonkey guy, so I typically use CMonkey on Linux like I do on everything else. But Chromium works, gets the job done. It's a fast, light browser. I think the interface is dreadful.
Yeah, of course.
The interface, I can't stand flat interfaces at all. I just don't like them. I don't like wondering whether I'm clicking on a button or that's just a color.
And of course, by default, there's probably some stuff in it that sends more data off to Google.
Well, yeah, there's all of that stuff. There's all the telemetry concern. But as Hervey explained yesterday, Firefox 52 is a problem for us. Once they switch to, and it's not just us. That's the thing that we all need to keep in mind. It's not just OS 2 that is affected by this shift to Rust. It's all of the non-T tier 1 platforms. So if you're not running Windows, Linux, or Mac, you're in the same boat. I mean, effectively, you're going to lose the ability to run a modern Firefox until you do a lot of work to get Rust working on your platform.
And for voice, we sponsored them last year for some Firefox development. And I talked to Dimitri last year in Cologne about Firefox. And the complaints are not just coming from him as the OS2 developer, but also other developers that work on other platforms. The whole Mozilla Foundation developers seem to have, in my opinion, go completely berserko. If you look
They
at
lost the plot years ago.
if you look at the if you look at the amount of libraries that go in and out of the product, it's virtually unmaintainable. That's also, you didn't say that part, but that's what also makes it difficult to maintain.
The interesting thing about the Firefox development itself is, like the space program, we get a lot of extra stuff that comes out of it. And how do we get that extra stuff? Well, Dimitri will run into a stumbling block, and there's a problem. Let's say we can't render video full screen, right? So you go to YouTube, you click the full screen button, and you don't get full screen. Well, it turns out that there's a library that they use for the modern Firefox that we don't have. And we've been using a workaround for that up until this point. We can no longer use the workaround. So then he stops and he builds that library. And then releases that library separately through the NetLabs repository. So we can use that for other things. That's like an extra thing. And then, of course, Firefox is fixed and you get full screen video. And that's the way it goes. So then there'll be something else in Firefox, and this doesn't work right. Well, it doesn't work right because we don't have that library. Then he builds the library. So we end up with something else. So there's a lot of this stuff, it's like Tang, comes out of the space program, tastes good for a while till the novelty wears off. All of this is still in flux. These are really, really, really forward-looking statements. I don't know how much of this we're going to actually get. We really, 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 really need to get NLV done. We need to get non-English versions cooked and installable and working. That's a tremendous amount of work. The updates and whatnot are going to happen along the way, and they'll get included by osmosis, so they'll be there. That's not really a thing. But a lot of these other things, new features, new program versions that do not yet exist, like Java 8, if they're there, we definitely want to include them. Are they a major focus of our attention right now? No, they're not. We would like to include them. They're on the map. But if they're not in 5.1, they may make it to 5.2, or they may come out as an update to 5.1 and 5.1.1 and be available for everyone. But this is what we'd like to see in the package. That's the point.
What about, I don't know whether you do or not, but do you include a version of GCC with the product or not?
Downloadable from ArcaOS Package Manager.
But it doesn't come installed?
It doesn't come pre-installed. We made the decision when we were talking about installation personalities. Installation personalities grew out of sort of, for me at least, a Linux concept of installation patterns. So when you install OpenSUSE, you can say, I want to install a development workstation.
Right.
So it pushes down all the packages that it thinks that you as a developer might need. And if you're going to be developing for the desktop, you're going to need some other packages. And it will push down all those packages. Our installation personalities are slightly different than that, in that we figure that if you're going to be doing development, the best thing to do is to download the latest versions of those packages from ArcaOS Package Manager and pull them all down. Eventually, it would be, and you can filter, of course, in ArcaOS Package Manager on development packages and select the ones that you want and do it that way. You don't need to look at the full list like we generally do. You can narrow that down. The idea is that if you're a developer and you know that you need development tools, then you should probably be able to figure out which development tools, at a minimum, you're going to need, and then go back and get the other ones later, instead of pushing all of that into the ISO and making everyone download an even larger file. And it's interesting, the download server is not the same box as the web server. So the web server can be really bogged down and really slow, and that is going to change, I promise. The download box is a completely different machine. Both of them are located on a 150 megabit per second synchronous fiber link. But you would not believe how many people say, I can't download my ISO, it's taking so long. That's not me, that's not my fault. But whether it's my fault or not, if I double the size of the ISO to put extra stuff in that perhaps 90% of the people aren't going to need, then 100% of the people are going to get mad at me. So it just seemed to make more sense, just like the wallpaper thing, right? If you want additional wallpaper, download the additional wallpaper. And so in that regard, our focus is on making it available for people to get, making it easy for people to get.
That's also how most Linux distributions work. It's just a naked ISO, and it detects NIC, and during installation it says, I have these package services available, and then it gives you, and then it downloads a lot of stuff from there.
Right. And that, one of the installation scenarios that we considered early on was being able to select updates and off-site content to pull down during the installation and push. That may happen too at some point. I think that by version 6 you may see a completely different installer. And I'm not kidding about that. And I'm not kidding about version 6 either. I mean, we see ArcaOS continuing for many years yet. The absolutely overwhelming response to ArcaOS 5 was proof to us that there really still is a market for an alternative operating system that doesn't have any telemetry in it and is reasonably secure, and it doesn't change with every single update that's pushed down to it.
Can I ask you, what about the customer base that you have? Maybe you can't talk about this, but how many people buy it? You know, who are they? In the sense of, are they corporations? Can you answer any of those questions?
I can answer in some general terms. OS2 is still in a number of vertical markets in terms of enterprise clients. So it's still in the insurance industry, it's still in finance in certain places. It's still in manufacturing. It's still in subways in some places. It's still in essentially automation. And one of the interesting flip sides of that sort of makes it difficult to get to these people is that OS2 is quite often so embedded in the equipment and not running on the desktop where people aren't really interfacing with the workplace shell. See, when we talk about OS2 and we talk about workplace shell, the installation bases are different. These people don't even know that OS2 is running the machine, right? They have a laser cutting machine and it cuts diamonds every day, right? What runs the laser cutting machine? No one knows. I come into work in the morning, I press the button, the conveyor belt starts, the work gets done until it doesn't work. Oh, something's broken. Call the company that makes the cutting machine. The company that makes the cutting machine has to say, gee, the last time we got that batch of hardware, we were able to run OS2 Warp 4 on it, or Ecom Station. We can't get that hardware anymore. Now we need to find someone with an updated driver so we can install a newer machine in order to drive our laser cutting machine. Mind you, the guy using the cutting machine still has no idea. He knows that he's got a problem. He can't get his work done, and he contacted the manufacturer of the cutting machine. The manufacturer of the cutting machine has got a problem. He's either going to solve it, he's going to go to a different platform, or his customer's going to find another cutting machine manufacturer. That's when we get the phone call. Sometimes you contact an industry, you contact a company, and you think that I want to talk to someone in IT about OS2. Unfortunately, the last guy who worked on the OS2 systems that were there retired 5 years ago. And they've just been running. You know, all that stuff just keeps running. And the guy who's in that position now has no idea. Because he's got his hands full already. He's got all those Windows machines, right? And they're all broken. So getting to the right person who knows what's there is as difficult as those people finding us when they need help. So it's a process. It's a process. In terms of overall number of users, let me just say that there are four figures of people using ArcaOS 5 right now. And when you look at, we see every trouble ticket that's lodged that comes in. I get an echo of every ticket. And I think, oh, another ticket. And then I think, compared to how many installations are out there, it's not really a lot of tickets. It really is not. These are exceptional things that happen. They're edge cases. They're weird things. This didn't work on my XYZ machine that I bought last month. Well, thank you.
So you have upwards of 10,000, say?
Nice. No, I didn't say upwards of 10,000.
You said four figures.
I said four figures.
I'm being optimistic.
Somewhere between, we have over 1,000 and less than 10,000 right now. And remember that we launched ArcaOS 5 May 15.
Okay.
So,
Follow-on question. So are they all sort of extreme cases, oddballs, like the people in this room? Or are they real people?
you mean
Like that one?
the trouble tickets to get lodged? Are they all?
The users.
The users.
Yeah, the four figures of users.
Here's the interesting thing. Most of those users are individual users. Those are not enterprise customers. We have barely scratched the surface for enterprise customers. We have not focused on enterprise customers yet. We're starting to do that now. We were absolutely overwhelmed. Look, if we would have gotten a trickle of personal users ordering when we launched, we would have been focused on enterprise customers by June. It didn't happen that way. It completely took us by surprise. And there were so many more individuals ordering ArcaOS than we had anticipated that we were literally bowled over. Literally and figuratively bowled over. As in, I was down to like 2 hours of sleep a night because I had to babysit the server, and there were a whole bunch of things that just went on. Everything sort of happened at once. And I don't mean champagne corks popping. We didn't even have time to pop open a bottle of champagne, right? It just happened. It was one of those things. We're way over time.
We're over time. I wanted to make the comment that you're talking about personalities, and an embedded personality would be a help for some of us.
So bottom line is, if you know of any companies that may have, even if you think, they're not using OS2 on the desktop. If you think, they've got a such and such machine that's folding boxes. Well, maybe that machine that's cutting the cardboard and doing the folding is run by OS2. Or maybe there's an old voicemail system. There's another vertical market. Tons of voicemail systems were built with OS2 servers, an OS2 box, managing all those voicemail boxes. And you know what happens? The hard drive dies.
Yeah.
And it's an old IDE hard drive.
Yeah.
On a motherboard that only accepts up to a 20 gigabyte IDE drive.
Yeah. You've got the system requirements of Warp 3.
There you go.
Install ArcaOS. personality would really, really help.
It's unbelievable when you stop to think about it. I had a friend of mine who's going to be going out and seeking some of these companies, and we were talking about vertical markets. And I started making a list, and the list got longer and longer and longer, and the more I thought about it, considering the amount of automation that we have today, the more I realized there are tons of possibilities. Maybe not endless possibilities. I mean, in general, there are certain areas where it would be unlikely to find OS 2. We did get an inquiry from a fellow setting up a medical office, and he wanted to do it on OS 2. But of course, he wanted to build the whole system up from scratch and develop it and whatnot. That's sort of an odd request. I don't know how many medical record systems are still running OS 2, but it's possible. Anything that's got DB2 on the back end may have OS 2 on the front end, even if the person running the front end doesn't know that he's interacting with OS 2. So when you think about, well, who would have DB2? Well, DB2 was a large entrenched user base. IBM rolled that out to a lot of their customers. Any of those places could still be using OS 2 somewhere and not even realize it. So it's untapped.
Now, what about the usage of what's the Go web server, for example? That's an indication that there's people out there that use that.
Yeah.
That's stuff you can actually find out, I think, isn't it?
It's not there anymore.
Oh, it doesn't? Oh, okay.
Yeah, sadly. And
I'm the only one, I guess.
And a lot of us running Apache have nailed down Apache so that it doesn't even report what version it is. And if you go someplace like Netcraft's, what's that site running?
Yeah.
OS 2 Apache is reported as what, Sun or Iris, right. So
AIX.
it's almost impossible to tell from that stuff. You need to get to the people who know, and hopefully they haven't retired or worse, passed on.
Luis,
Yes.
someone is asking if it will make sense to have an ArcaOS server, if there is any request to try to grab some of the components of War Server for Business and try to bundle it.
The answer to that question is, I don't know. If someone were to come to us and say, we need a fleet of replacement OS 2 based servers, we would consider doing a server edition. I mean, we're not averse to it. It's just that when we set out to build ArcaOS, the thought was that if you have a Linux box and you want it to be a server or you want it to be a workstation, it's the same installation. So we started from that model when we built it. But if someone said, yeah, I wanted to take the place of Warp Server and I just wanted to have the Warp Server type components on it, we would consider an addition like that. Sure.
We push off other questions to a future session.
Yeah, let's do that. And you catch me, I'm floating around getting coffee. All right?
This is not Lewis's last session today.
No, not by a long shot. I have to finish my next session so that I know what I'm presenting. Thank you. Come on. No.